We have a very special guest today who we're going to introduce to you in just a minute. I got to say, I'm so grateful to you, our donors, because thanks to you, despite the pandemic, PathLight has thrived and moved forward in many really strategic ways in the midst of all of this. I'm actually speaking to you this morning from Belize. It's my first time back in 15 months. I'm very excited to be here. I'm here for our graduation. I'm also here to meet with some key partners and also to meet with our PathLight Belize staff. Boy, I tell you, I'm so proud of our PathLight Belize staff. As the pandemic has forced all of us to go digital and do events like this on Zoom, we found really strategic ways that actually has been beneficial. Our teacher training program, for example, has been able to connect with more teachers in more remote areas than they have in the past, and even more cost-effective and efficient way. Our sponsorship program, we found ways through WhatsApp and Zoom and other platforms to connect with each of our students on a daily basis and to continue our spiritual formation and character development efforts. And it's actually helped us to kind of codify that and digitize all of that. And it's been excellent. And thanks to your generosity, we were able to, in the midst of a lot of food insecurity and as kids were struggling with digital data, you helped us provide months worth of food for every one of our students for multiple months. And we were even able to help some of the children from some of the neediest schools that we partner with. And so thank you so much for that. It's really been a crazy but a tremendous year. COVID also forced us to accelerate some key aspects of our 10-year strategy. And one of those was to hire our very first full-time Belizean executive director. Now, I tried to hire Adeli Katsum about 2 years ago, and the timing just wasn't right. But thankfully, she came on board at that time as a strategic consultant, and she was instrumental in helping us to meet with some of the government officials, to meet with key business leaders, and to meet with some of the international NGO agencies. And that was so strategic. And thankfully, Adeli agreed to join our team just a couple of months ago. She and I, since we'd had the opportunity to work together and the staff had already grown to know her and respect her and appreciate and love her, it was such a natural transition. And we are so blessed to have Adeli on our team. And so I want to welcome Adeli to this. Hi, Adeli.
Hi, Roger. Hello,
I'm going to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hello, everybody.
I'm going to turn this over to you, Adeli, and you're going to tell us a little bit more specifically what's going on here on the ground in Belize, and then introduce our speaker for this morning. Take it away, Adeli.
Thank you, Roger. Well, as Roger said, I've been working alongside him for the last 2 years, and during that time, I really and truly fell in love with PathLight. For me, there were two big things that sold me on the importance of having an organization like PathLight in Belize. And those two things were, first, the fact that PathLight has come alongside the government of Belize and is helping us as Belizeans achieve our national goal of having a quality education for each and every child in this country. And the second thing was that it touched me personally. On a personal level, I know that I couldn't be here today. I could not have had the level of education that I have today if there weren't people like you out there and in my own country to help, because I was able to get to where I am through scholarships and through the generosity of people who willingly supported the children of Belize. And so I want to thank PathLight, thank Roger for bringing me on board. I know it took 2 years, but you know what? I always say, it's everything happens in its own time, and I'm here now. I'm really, really excited about being on board. I have some good news to share with you. There are a few announcements I'd like to share. There's so many things that PathLight does. It's an organization that I find to be very results oriented. And that was one of the things that made me decide that this is where I need to be at this time. Just in this week, There's a lot that has been happening, but I'll share just a few of them with you. On Saturday, we have a graduation of our 2021 cohort of students. We have 49 students that will be graduating from PathLight's Sponsorship Plus program. And these are children who have been able to work. We've worked with these children for at least 4 years. For some of them, it's more than that, for 6 years. These 49 students are graduating both from some from high school and some from tertiary level institutions. So we're happy to say congratulations to all of those students, and I want to extend support and gratitude to all the staff and all the sponsors and donors who made this possible. It could not have happened if we didn't have a whole team of people working together to bring these students through these years of high school, and also, more importantly, to get through school in this time of COVID. I also want to share with you that we have a teacher training program coming up soon. And this teacher training program, well, we've been doing teacher training all year round. And just between January and now, we've reached over 1,000 teachers in our teacher training program. We want to continue to do that. We're aiming to reach 300 teachers in our annual teacher training conference, which takes place from July 5th to the 9th under the theme of learning together, leaning forward. This theme is really important. We want to build a sense of unity among teachers, among students, amongst all of us, because we realize the importance of having the unity, the adaptability, and more importantly, the resilience to meet the new challenges that come with education in a time of COVID. PathLight has not stopped the work. COVID did not stop us. We're very persistent. In fact, just Roger not giving up on me shows the level of persistence that PathLight has. And we've persisted with our students, with the teachers. We've been very resilient. And so we continue to do the great work that we set out to do. I have even more exciting news. Today, we're launching our Back to School campaign. And this campaign allows us to continue to do the work with the students and the teachers. And we've been blessed by a donor who has already committed $25,000 in matching funds. And so we're hoping that with your generosity and with your support, we will continue to do this work of transforming education and development in the country of Belize. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we love Dr. Zabaneh so much, because he has some really innovative ideas about how we in Belize can work, can improve on the quality of education in the country and still achieve, in fact, achieve even in a much better way the objectives of having a quality education for each child. So PathLight working hand in hand with the government of Belize, working hand in hand with you as donors and sponsors and people who are interested in the work that we do, is what has enabled us to be so effective here in this country. Thank you. And I now pass over to Irv, who will be introducing Dr. Zabaneh.
Well, thank you, Adeli, and welcome, Dr. Zabaneh. We are very delighted to have you join us in our very first PathLight Speaker Series. And the topic today is reimagining education in Belize. And you are supremely qualified for this role for many reasons, including your PhD in applied economics with a focus with advanced thinking and degrees in education and learning. And of course, as the Minister of State in Belize in the Ministry of Education, you are well qualified to have impact. But a little bit of a quick connection and story. So Dr. Zabaneh, and Adeli and I actually are from the same class in Belize. So Dr. Zabaneh and Adeli went to St. John's Sixth Form, and they were classmates with my identical twin, Alvin, and I was at Belize Technical College at the time. So we have a generation together here that have known each other for a very, very long time. So Dr. Zabaneh, welcome to our discussion, and we are very delighted to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irv. It's a great honor. Thank you.
So before we dive into how we reimagine education in Belize, how are you doing? How are you and your family doing? And, you know, kind of thinking through this period with COVID and its impact on our country, how are you doing?
Yes, thanks. I guess like other families, we have tried our best to adapt to being at home, trying to create new activities inside the walls of our home as best as we can. And so we're doing well. Praise God, we're doing well. Thanks for asking.
Oh, very good, very good. So Dr. Zabaneh, could you give the audience a sense of your background? I've talked about your PhD in applied economics, but could you give us a sense for your journey? Because not only do you've taught in academic circles, both in the States and in Belize, you also have quite a background in operating in Belize in multiple aspects of the country's development. I'd love for you to give the audience some backstory of how you even came to this journey.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I grew up in the southern district, Stan Creek district, in a rural community called Puna. And then I attended the high school in Dangriga, moved on to St. John's College, as you just pointed out. And back then, Belize was still considered from IFIs to be below the threshold for scholarships. So I think a number of us had the good fortune to get scholarships to study in the US. I returned and worked in the government for about 5 years, various ministries. We set up Bell Trade, which deals with investment and trade. And then I worked in the private sector. I come from a family working in agriculture and tourism. And so I've been blessed with multiple experiences, and I've learned a whole lot from many people along the way.
Oh, very good. So Dr. Zabaneh, before you and I started this discussion, just before we had a screen up on your recent book, it's called The Sustainable Human Development of Belize, A New Approach for a Better Future. And I want to talk a little bit about that book, but there is another book that you wrote, which was before this one, called, it's The Sustainable Development of Belize, A Citizen's Manual. Now, I have read your second book, but I did not read your first book. Could you give me a sense for what's, you know, in summary, what were you, in terms of the pillars of that book, what was the core thinking?
Yes, we that book kind of laid the foundation for the second book. We looked at the sustainable development pillars as presented in the Brundtland Report, which came out in 1987, looking at all the issues that the world had been facing to that point, environmental, economic, and social challenges. And so I tried to capture that, and I also at the human time as well. So that book really laid the foundation for this one.
Very good. If we could dig in then on the current book, The Sustainable Human Development, just in the title itself, when the audience hears sustainable human development, what does that mean? And how should we define that term as you've detailed out in your book?
Right. Well, first of all, I was trained in economics. I believe we have a common training, yourself and Adele, in economics. But as I started to practice in Belize, I found that we could gain significantly from other disciplines. In that search is when I came upon works of scientists in the area of sustainable development, and then in a parallel way with those who are studying human development. And it was surprising to me that there was not more collaboration between these two groups of scholars. And so I started to look at the few persons who had considered the merits of both areas, and then worked on a model really to bring all these ideas together into one, because sustaining the future of humanity is in fact the one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is human development. So one cannot operate without the other. If we don't have human development, we cannot have sustainable development, and vice versa. So I brought these two concepts together, and in fact created a definition that says that we have our future to look at. So we have people or new generations that are coming, and that we want to make sure that their quality of life is also considered in the decisions we take today. And that the decisions we take today are in fact decisions on how to expand people's opportunities so that they can live a very good life, a life that they dream about. So in essence, that is what this title means. It's sustaining human development. And human development is in fact going to ensure sustainable development as well.
No, I appreciate that, Dr. Zabaneh. And in fact, in your book, you apply a framework, a very specific framework, the Generalized Sustainable Capability Framework. And in that framework, you describe 4 factors. You talk about social factors, economic factors, political institutional factors, and the environmental factors. And you took that framework and applied it in the context of Belize to begin to address this question of sustainability. And then you went even further and applied it in the context of education, which obviously is the intersection for this important discussion and for all the people who are a part of our conversation today. Can we start with your 4 factors, just to give everybody on this call a sense for, when you lay the 4 factors, the social, economic, political, institutional, and environmental, what the context is in Belize? Because I want to bring this straight into Belize now, and then think about, in the end, we're going to talk about what is sustainable development in the context of Belize and where we go from here. But I think laying down those 4 factors in the context of Belize would be very important.
Yes, indeed. So if you wish to take a macro look, in the first instance, the models with these 4 pillars of sustainable development as promoted by the United Nations, which I think is a great categorization, because we look at social factors. What's the impact of family? We look at the importance of having children in an environment where they can get the sustenance, if you wish, from early, from parents. They see their father, they see their mother at home, and hopefully then that creates a certain sense of well-being, a certain amount of self-esteem, a certain direction, and early education in the family. So we look at what happens when the family breaks down. And we can think of Professor Gale's report about what the south side of Belize City looks like when the family breaks down, and the effects of that. We also look at religion, the institution of religion, how that has helped us, for example, with our education system. We certainly then talk about education and health, and we look at some important concepts in the social field. Important concepts like equity, social cohesion, leadership. These are important aspects that affect how well a society works together. And then we look at various groups within our country. So that's the context, the social context. The economic context, likewise, we look at that. Different sectors within the economy. Then we look at larger macro issues like our national debt. We look at how government spending has been prioritized, how that impacts the opportunities of people, and so forth. That's all those economic issues. Then the political institution is very important. As you know, we've been having industrial action from the public service here in Belize, and the teachers. The teachers have passed their strike just in fact on Monday. And so we look at, and part of what they're fighting for is for us to improve our governance, improve the institutions to guarantee justice, to reduce corruption, these types of things. So that pillar looks at what kinds of institutions do we have in place, how well have they been performing, and what might they not be performing, how can we improve them, etc. And certainly then the environmental pillar looks at the ecology, the natural environment around us. How well are we doing in terms of, for example, our fisheries or our forestry, our heritage from the Mayan sites, etc. How are we taking care of those precious environmental treasures that we have? So those are the four main areas that we look at to try and get as clear an idea of what is important and how we should try to improve those areas to impact the rest that's in the model itself.
Yeah, if I can touch on one other aspect of your model, because a critical component is this kind of interaction with agency at the individual level, at the community level. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how these four factors, the social, economic, political, institution, environmental, come together at the individual and community ownership? Because that is, I thought that was super powerful in the way you described this model for how we can have change. And I'd love to touch on that before we get into more specific recommendations and discussions around education, which you have an extensive set of guidance and kind of think around.
Yes. So that's the first part of the model, the macro side. So the rest of the model speaks to the micro side of the model. So if you will, what we just talked about comes from the sustainable development literature. Now, what we get into comes from the human development literature, which talks about what you just mentioned, agency. There's something called a conversion process that we include there in the model that says that life is dynamic. So these forces act upon each other and interrelate. So, for example, an economic policy to expand the sugar industry will have other very important dimensions to look at. What are the environmental regulations that are in place to mitigate any pollution from that expansion of the industry? Because yes, we might be looking at it, there will be more employment, there will be more exportation, there will be more foreign exchange earnings, but there may also be more pollution. And we have seen that, in fact, in the past few years with the pollution of the New River in Orange Walk. So that's the macro side. And all of that, those forces interrelate with each other in this conversion process that in this model, all of the impact, the end result either expands the opportunities that we call the capability set of people. It either makes you more able to attain your dreams, your aspirations, meaning that you have more access to education. It's not just that we say you have an educational institution, but that everybody has opportunity to actually graduate from that institution. Because sometimes you might have the institution, but you don't have the wherewithal for people to actually take advantage of that education. So that's the capability set. And then the last part of the model is about things, meaning what you end up doing, what you end up being in life. And within that, there is this very powerful psychological concept of agency. So how in your life experience do you develop the confidence, the self-efficacy to believe in the ability to go forward and to overcome obstacles, and to not just do that for your own self, but to also be able to do that to empower other people. So in a nutshell, then it becomes a cycle. Either the system is empowering you to do that, and then you come back in a virtuous cycle to help others, or the entire structure is not empowering you to do that, and then you end up with low agency and you're not able to help people around you. And that, of course, includes your own self.
Dr. Zabaneh, that's awesome. That's an excellent jump off point to the specifics of the impact of education. Now, in your book, you have a number of recommendations, and in your recommendation set, I'm going to focus on primary and tertiary education because you have 7 specific recommendations in this domain, and some of it actually may surprise the audience. And for educators in the audience, probably not so much. But if I could list off your recommendations, because I do want to tackle them one by one and some of your specific actions in country, given now that we have this framework around the 4 pillars and the agency component. So you talk about 1, reducing the number of subjects, 2, reducing homework, 3, training teachers at subject level, 4, introducing personalized learning and leadership, 5, using the curriculum framework developed by the International Bureau of Education and UNESCO, 6, reforming the teacher training program, and 7, engaging in a national consultation with stakeholders. So a number of recommendations, which of course now we have an opportunity, right, in country to action off. Let me start with the very first one, reducing the number of subjects. I thought that was quite, I mean, we are all, you, Adeli, and I are products of the system. You know, we grew up where we had to remember everything and take all our subjects. I am very, very interested in understanding kind of that core concept, like what's happening in our educational system right now and the kinds of educational reform you're thinking about.
Right. So in the spirit of sustainable human development, we analyzed the education system and brought in tools from economics. So that there's a subfield of economics and education called the economics of education. And from the time when we used to go to school, which is, I'm sorry to say, Irv, a couple decades now, or on the other hand, let me put it positively, you know, we've hopefully gained some good wisdom over the years. And to now, when we used to take 7, 8 subjects, now we're finding our children in a very stressful environment being asked to take 12, 13, 14 subjects. So this prompted the application of the idea of diminishing returns to inputs, the law of diminishing returns in economics. So we have now started a consultation with stakeholders, which is the point number 7. And in that set of consultations, I am pleased to inform you all that the majority of persons, we're on the same page, that we have now gone way too far in the number of subjects that we are asking our students to work through, our teachers to lead with, our managements, our parents. So in a nutshell, what we are experiencing is that we've gotten in that range of returns that's negative, in my view. So that I use and I'll share this very quickly, a real example in agriculture, where in the citrus industry in Belize about 30 or 40 years ago, they used to put just a uniform 10 pounds of fertilizer per tree for each of the 2 cycles. After people started to be more analytical, more scientific methods like soil samples and leaf samples, it became clear to them that not the whole farm, not each tree requires 10 pounds of fertilizer. And so they were able to cut back and then take those savings and put it into other areas that were neglected. For example, drainage, dealing with insects and pests and so forth. Increasing output from about 75 boxes per acre to almost 200 boxes per acre by cutting back on an input. So my argument is the same in this case, that by cutting back on the number of subjects, we could start to reverse that low performance that we've been seeing over the years from our students in our educational system. As you know, unfortunately, graduates from the primary sector and from the secondary levels has been dismal, the performance of our students. And not just in the dimension of examinations, but also in other important social skills that they should have had. Critical thinking skills, very limited. Employers have problems with graduates, and so do the tertiary institutions when they get to that level. So by cutting back on the number of subjects, I am arguing that we will begin to see an increase in the output and the outcomes from the education system. So in a nutshell, that is what we're arguing. And I will close with this, that it's not just us in Belize now. The OECD came out with a paper about 2 years ago, where even the very developed countries are experiencing the same phenomenon. And their recommendation is to cut back on the number of subjects so that teachers can focus and get students to have depth and not just breadth of coverage of material.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Zabaneh. Actually, for everybody in the audience, if you want to join the discussion, you certainly can just drop questions into the chat. I will weave any questions into the discussion so we could get as many people to participate as possible. Can I just build on that observation though? Because when I read that recommendation, I agreed with it. And then I thought about kind of how do you, less subjects, yes, but then how do you target subjects to be more relevant to job going forward? And I think about, so I've spent my career in technology, as you're aware. Building software companies and building software. And this is a very tech-driven, it's about, STEM learning, computer science driven. And I'm wondering from a curriculum development, less subjects, yes, but what about the other pivot related to how do we train our students to have job relevance going forward in an economy that has shifted significantly to the use of technology?
So 2 points to that, Irv, is that one, we have to deal with teacher training and reforming the teacher training programs so that teachers are better equipped. And I know that you all have been focusing quite a bit on that, which is fantastic. Also, we have a document that, in fact, Adele was an author of that document, Horizon 2030, that was prepared in 2009 and that ought to have been guiding what we do for the following 20 years. So we're now 10 years into it, and we have another 10 years. But in there, they did a fantastic job of consultations around the country and hearing from all stakeholders. What kind of country do we want? What's our vision for Belize? How do we strengthen the social, the economic, the environmental pillars? All of that is in that original document. Unfortunately, in my view, the document has not been fully utilized for us to get the great benefits that we can when we determine our actual policy implementation. Because obviously one thing is to put something on paper, say we create an agricultural policy or an educational policy, but then we stop there and we don't implement, and worst of all, we don't evaluate so that we could improve. So that is an important document, I believe, that will guide us. There have been other studies that have been done to get more specifics on what we need. And to the point of IT and those important new areas that students must all take with them, we're envisioning this new curriculum to utilize IT in every subject. So even when you're doing an art subject, we can take on the latest software to aid children, whether it is in music, whether it is in art, whatever the case may be, for them. So it's infusing technology within every and all subjects. But that will have to start with us training our teachers to be able to do that on the ground, so to speak, in the classroom.
Dr. Zabaneh, there's a comment in the chat that's actually very interesting. It says the training received and earned by teachers at the primary level, whether it's an associate degree or bachelor's degree, in primary education is generic in nature. Secondary training is specialized. There's a drastic need for a specialization at the primary level. In this way, performance can increase. Any thoughts and kind of reflections on that?
Yes, in fact, that is one of my recommendations, that we need to have teachers specialize. So if we're going to do, for example, personalized learning, that means that we want to look at where students are at any point in time. If a student is in what we would call standard 4, or let's say grade 5, but they have the ability to do grade 7 math, we must find a way for that child to be able to take those courses. That is an issue related to logistics. So then we have to train our teachers to be able to do that, and have people specialize in that kind of work, have those kinds of skills. Then we need to look at children in their age group, but across a number of grades. So what is the brain development like for children from the ages of 5 to, let's say, 8 years of age? What's their development for the next 3 years, and so forth? And what kinds of skills must our teachers have who are guiding our children at those levels? What do they need to know to understand in terms of pedagogical skills so they can reach these children? Right now, there's nothing being done in that area because teachers are overwhelmed to just be delivering on the very massive curriculum that they have. So even if they were independently trying to do that on their own accord, there's a lot of stress because of the overloaded curriculum. And so these are the important things we are addressing right now.
Yeah, no, this is powerful, Dr. Zabaneh. Actually, there's one comment on the chat about what is the role of vocational training. We talked about technology and kind of training the future. There's another dimension to this, which is around vocational training. I'd love some quick comments on that, because that's equally relevant.
Certainly, certainly. When we had the consultations with the BNTU and we were talking about reducing the number of subjects, well, a number of teachers asked, does that mean now that we will have a retrenchment of teachers? And you could imagine that question in the context of strikes and all that. So no, we told them, listen, if you look at the numbers at the high school level, we only have 52% of our students who should be at the secondary level at the secondary level. At the primary level, we have about 95%. So in absolute numbers, that works out to about 22,000 students between the ages of 13 and 16 who are actually at the secondary level. And that would include students who would want to be in vocational areas as well. And it means then that we have another 20,000 students who are not in school. And this number, very sadly, has been maintained for the past 2 decades at least. So we've had this perpetuation of students out of school for all these years. Within the vocational sector, we only have about 900 students across the country. And so this is an area of priority for us, because many times students, again, because of curriculum overload, become frustrated in the traditional academic subjects. And many of them might have skills, have interest in electrical, mechanical, and so on. So clearly we see that vocational can be a panacea, if you will, to help us solve this this problem of all these students out of that level of education.
That's really good. By the way, Dr. Zabaneh, I know you've started the Teacher Learning Institute inside the Ministry of Education, and I'm wondering if you could give just the audience an update on that, because I would imagine this is the group and the effort where you expect to take this conversation we're having and really put it into practice. You know, kind of as the point of execution of a lot of this thinking around reducing the subjects and having specialized training and having specialized programs for students. So what's the status? How are things going in kind of putting that institute in place?
Yes, this is an important institute because it will have many important roles. One of them, for example, will be to standardize, to give accreditation to teacher training generally, because teachers are required during the summer to take professional development courses. And so a number of entities, institutions, including PathLight, are engaged in providing training to teachers. But there's not a coherent set of standards on what that would entail and how it would translate into a certain number of credit hours that you would gain. So that's one of the things the Teacher Learning Institute is looking at now. And then again, as we had alluded to a couple of times, the best practices to be able to deliver the new curriculum that we're working on. So that's going to be another area that the Teacher Learning Institute will be focused and is focusing now, because we do intend to start with a curriculum with far less, well, I wouldn't say far less, but with less subjects by this September when we reopen. And it's an ongoing process, so we will try to do as much as we can before school opens, and we continue in consultation and working with our stakeholders to try and reach this vision of a better curriculum and certainly a better school system.
No, thank you for that. I think there's a question here in the chat around mandatory school for secondary, but I'd like to tie that to in my mind a related question, which is, I know in the planned education Belize there was a discussion of free education. Now, given our current macroeconomic climate, I know these things are delayed, but I'd love your thinking around. I don't know about mandatory secondary. I know our rates at the secondary level are not where they need to be. At PathLight, we try to get 90% of our students. We work in a wraparound program, which you're very aware of, to get 90% of our students. We know the national average is hovering around 50% for high school. Would love your reflection on those two topics, right? Kind of in the end, free education, as we kind of, again, this is looking beyond the moment, right? The current economic crisis, hopefully, prayerfully, will be behind us in the future, near future, right? It'll take some time. But I love your thinking around free education and mandatory education at the secondary level and where that discussion is internally.
Certainly, a couple of things. So you're dealing, when we talk about free education, we're talking about the ability of the government to be able to deliver at a macro level. And that requires then macro analysis of what has been occurring and where we are with our economy. So this new government came in and was overwhelmingly supported because of what they perceived, what they saw from the previous administration. Now, if the previous administration obviously had been satisfying their needs, then they would have continued to be here. That's how politics operates around the world. And it is our view that the prioritization of resources did not include education and health from the past administration. What was done was a lot of the spending went into physical infrastructure, highways, buildings, and that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. Once we reprioritize our expenditures, then there will be more funds available for the priorities that we have, which include education is our number one priority, and of course health. So we believe that in the first instance, once we can, as you correctly said, move out of this depression, economic depression that we're in, then we can start to address putting more resources into education so that we can fulfill that promise that we made to the people for free education up to high school, up to the end of the 4 years. So that's the first part. Secondly, COVID has taught everyone a lesson around the world about the power of information technology. Look at what we're doing today. We see this at all levels in Belize. And I could use the tertiary level and specifically the University of Belize as an example. Before COVID, there was a lot of pressure because the university had not been getting resources for it to do what it needed to do. But with COVID now and utilizing this media for instruction has reduced the cost tremendously for us to reach our students across the country. So now we have a new innovation in education that has been brought to us because of COVID. And now with the retraining of our teachers, we can see that as another piece of the answer to getting everybody to have free education as we had promised. Because now our costs can be lower, and then we are reprioritizing resources to the sector. So that's the strategy that we have.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and we are at PathLight, to all the points you just made about the impact of COVID, we pivoted very quickly to the use of technology to do remote training for teachers. We were unhindered in our efforts, right? And that's the future. It's going to be we see a future of a hybrid, using technology and some in person to accelerate our learning process. It also creates all kinds of opportunities, including time shifting when you learn, self-driven learning modules, right? So just the opportunities there are to your point, from back to some economics, from an efficiency perspective, are really quite encouraging. So a couple of quick comments and then a question. Thank you very much for all the comments in the chat. It is excellent, really, really appreciative. A reminder, we are kicking off with this session our back to school campaign. We every year raise over 150,000 to US dollars to fund about 60 students. We have a matching donor who's given 25,000. If you want to participate with us, please feel free to do so. And then finally on this, Dr. Zabaneh, there's one mention in the chat that caught my attention, which is around specialized learning for kids that learn differently, whether due to autism or attention deficit disorder or similar, where the traditional classroom model is not helpful. Would love your reflection on this as well, as you think about kind of education reform. By the way, growing up in Belize, as you know, I mean, during the time we went through our education system, it was harsh on those who did not keep up. So I'm really curious on your reflection on this and what do we do go forward?
Yes, no. Unfortunately, we have some good experts. We've had over the years a number of our educators who have gotten specialized training in a variety of areas that can now come to bear. So this first phase of our curriculum consultations is focused directly on the issue of curriculum overload. Once that is addressed, then we go to the next phase to look at those very important dimensions that need to be addressed, like what you just mentioned. How do we deal with to also serve as best as possible children with special needs? Also, we need our curriculum to be culturally sensitive. We need to look at issues of those children where English is not their first language, because the curriculum as we have it assumes that English is our first language. So that's another area. So there are a number of things that now we bring our other specialists to bear on those points in the next phases, which are within the next few weeks, that we started to address those very important points as well.
Oh, very good. So there are questions in here around counseling, what counseling plays in the education process. So as you're aware, one of the things that we do at PathLight is we have a wraparound system, education. We have mentors that come alongside our students, and it's part of the reason we get the results we do, right? It's bringing the whole student to school. That a student coming to school and showing up in class may have all kinds of other issues that are happening around them, family related, just life in general. Wondering from your perspective, again, in terms of education reform. I remember, again, being in our education system, there was just no place. I mean, there was no capacity in our school system to support students who were struggling with issues not necessarily related to education. Again, would love your reflection on this, Dr. Zabaneh.
Yes, certainly. In that appendix to the book, I speak about also training more social workers who would be working very closely with our teachers, our administrations, managements, to address the family issues, which are numerous. Um, that's a very, very important aspect that needs to be dealt with. In terms of children now at school, you had mentioned as one of the points that we're looking at leadership. So within that, you know, we have to look at this psychological conditions that our students are experiencing. What are those? And try to help them through those issues. We want them to be able to become better leaders themselves, obviously, starting with themselves. So things like emotional intelligence. This is a very powerful concept. And really and truly, if it were left to me, I would want to start the training in the House of Representatives, and then as a priority area. We need a lot of work in that at that level. And so really we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and be honest as to where we are. And if we're saying that we want to assist or we see problems at the primary level or at the secondary level with these issues, then we must also be honest and say we see it at our level. And so there are certain things that are very important countrywide. I'll state this. My own experience into the political arena. In my division in Dangriga, I have learned that emotional intelligence, unfortunately, is extremely low. The level of trust, the level of social cohesion is extremely low. The level of agency is practically non-existent because of the difficulties people have had to go through. So these are, in fact, the important things that we must invest in. It has to be holistic. So that is what I meant at the beginning. The people in the education sector must incorporate the ideas from the social sector, from the economic sector, the environmental sector, so that when we devise a plan, it is holistic and we're able to bring in these ideas and the contributions of persons from all these various fields.
So Dr. Zabaneh, in the last 4 minutes of our discussion, I want to squeeze in 2 more questions. So I'll tell you them both so you can, time split them for me. But, for the people in the audience, pretty much everybody in the audience has contributed in some way to education in Belize. My first question is, what would you say to us in terms of what more we can do to come alongside Belize? So that's question 1. Question 2 is, if you and I are having this conversation 3 years from now, when we're past some of the immediate crisis that we have, right? The macroeconomic condition, the teacher, strike actions, and, that the negotiations, just, pretty important hurdles straight ahead. If we're having this conversation 3 years from now, what would you look back on as success in thinking about reimagining education? So the first one is, how can we help? And the second one is, looking back 3 years from now, what would be the key indicators you would say are reflective of success in reimagining education in Belize?
Well, yes, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to, first of all, commend you and all of your team on what you have already been doing. That is significant. You are focused on precisely those very important areas: teacher training and expanding the opportunities for children, for students who are most restricted by what we have. I would say that expanding your work in those 2 areas is going to be tremendous for us to really make education work for our Belizean people. I would also add that if it's possible to look at expertise in terms of discussions with persons who have studied these issues, say in the US or in other parts of the world, their expertise and their ideas to share with us. I did the 2 years of research in the United States. I learned a lot about personalized learning. We recently had a consultant who is working with us on the secondary curriculum, who told us that in Jamaica, they saw the problem of overload a few years ago, are addressing it and are seeing significant improvements from their students. So at that level, we could certainly benefit from learning what other people are doing in other parts of the world. And so we can look at our own context to see what we can learn. 3 years from now, I would hope that we have addressed the issue of the IT vets, that we're far more utilizing our IT vets. We have a curriculum that is optimizing learning at school, and that would look like somewhere around 8 subjects. That does give the institution some flexibility in choosing a couple of those courses as well. That more students are able to access education, and that we are focusing not on teaching students to pass exams, but on preparing them for the real world in Belize. I would like to see that within 3 years, we are on the way to what I would have to use the words, on the way to sustainable human development.
Well, Dr. Zabaneh, thank you. Thank you so very much for, we're deeply honored that you would take the time to have this very, very important conversation with us. As I've mentioned, everybody in our audience have come alongside Belize in thinking about how education transforms a person, a community, and a nation. And so we're quite aligned on that. So thank you again. And thank you very much for everybody who's attended our session. We're very, very grateful that you're here and to be part of the discussion. Dr. Zabaneh, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of day.